sometimes you're talking to people and you're like, I don't understand why this person ain't understanding what I'm getting. And then it starts to make sense when you start to look back at ancient history at certain points and certain eras or certain chronological points in our ancestry, in our history. And we look back at things. You got, for instance, one chronological point is the Sphinx. You got ancient Egypt, you got the Sphinx. Ancient Kemet, you got the Sphinx, which is known as Haram Maket. And then you have the Sphinx has a human head with an animal body, right? You got the human head with the animal body. Now that's over 100,000 years ago. Then somewhere later on down the line, you have the reverse. Now you have animal heads with human bodies. Now I'm looking back at this and I'm saying, Spirit, what are you trying to convey to me? What are you saying? What does that mean? What is that about? And the Spirit gave it straight up, real simple. It said, that's when you were the mind of God. When you were showing that you were the mind of God. Later on in the hieroglyphs or the Middle Necher, you started saying the animal head with the human body, and the Spirit started saying that's when you became the body of God. So I said, okay. Oh, I get it. We were the mind of God because he had the human head and the animal body. Then reversed down the line, a couple of tens of thousands of years later, we had the animal head with the human body. And the human parts meant that we became a godly nature or godlike people or representing our God-esque in life. So I understood that. I said, okay, I guess you got to become the mind of God and then you become the body of God. That makes a lot of sense. And then when you fast forwarded 2,000 years later on, almost 2,000 years later on, you have a people called the Nation of Islam, the NOI. Now that was in the 1930s by Farad Muhammad and then Elijah Muhammad. And then they're kicking wisdom to fill your mind, to remind you that you are the mind of God. So I'm saying, okay. And then later on down the line, maybe 30 years later in the 1960s, you had somebody named Clarence Thomas X, or Clarence X Thomas, Clarence X you can call him. And he was a branch off the Nation of Islam and created something called the 5 Percenters. And the 5 Percenters were also telling you, again, reminding you that you are the mind of God. We are the gods and earths of reality, and we run this. So this is the 1960s. So I'm saying, okay, the Nation of Islam, the 5 Percenters. Cool. And then now I'm looking for was the body evidence. Then about 10, 20 years later, you have a people called God Body, or the people who are God Body. So then once again, Spirit is showing me once again that even later on down the line in the 20th century, quote unquote, that the Spirit is telling you, once you become the mind of God, then you become the body of God. Just like in chronological times in ancient order, when we had the Sphinx that had the human head with the animal body, and about tens of thousands of years later, you had the animal head with the human body. So that's Spirit telling us back then that once you become the mind of God, then you turn into the body of God. Now we fast forward that 2,000 years later, 2,000 and some change later, to the 1930s with the Nation of Islam, branched off from that with Clarence X, that became the 5% Nation, the gods and the earths, which both between the 1930s and the 1960s were talking about the mind of God. And then from Clarence X, 5% Nation, branched off God Body, which once again saying once you become the mind of God, then you become the body of God. You can't become the body of God until you become the mind of God. So it all makes sense. Bringing it back full circle to the conversation of why I may be talking to somebody, you may be talking to somebody trying to kick some knowledge or gnosis to someone, and they're not truly getting it. Now, me personally, as a science biologist, I understand this from an anatomical point of view just as much Because that split in our brain, in our skull, that split is called the longitudinal fissure. That split is called the longitudinal fissure. Now, when you start to put both halves together and you say God is good is bad, bad is good, pure is impure, impure is pure, wrong is right, right is wrong, and you begin tying these two things together, you begin meshing these two truths together to come to your own truth, to fine-tune your divine perception, that longitudinal fissure in the brain closes. Now, this is what you have in mythology called the smooth ashela over the philosopher's stone. The philosopher's stone is the pineal gland. So that smooth ashela, that becomes smooth, the ashela becomes smooth, is the longitudinal fissure that begins to close up and pop up as a smooth ashela over the philosopher's stone. So it makes sense. This is why sometimes you're talking to people and they just don't get what you're saying. They just cannot grasp. They can't fathom the gnosis that you are kicking to them, because it's a biological understanding, it's an anatomical understanding, it's a spiritual understanding, as well as an ancestral understanding. So don't lose your mind, don't lose your cool. Play your square, stay in your circle, and share when it's necessary. And most importantly, do not become emotional. Stay in your gnosis. G-O-D, generator, operator, destroyer. That's what you are and what you always be, as you are.